Today I want to show you exactly why Retatrutide is gaining so much attention, and where the excitement can get ahead of the evidence. If you already know drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, or Zepbound, the key difference is that Retatrutide is built as one molecule that activates 3 hormone receptors. By the end of this video, you should know what is proven, what is plausible, and what evidence is still not settled. Okay, now let's define Retatrutide cleanly. So, it is an investigational, once-weekly peptide developed by Lilly. Lilly describes it as a single molecule that activates receptors for GIP, GLP-1, and glucagon. In trials, it is given as a once-weekly subcutaneous injection. This is just a little pinch of skin right underneath, kind of right around below your belly button, and you can pinch a little bit of fat and inject there. And that gives you this accurate starting point before we compare it with semaglutide or tirzepatide. And the key going into the lock helps explain some of this. So an agonist, it activates a receptor. So when you hear triple agonist, don't hear 3 drugs mixed together. I want you to hear it as one molecule designed to activate 3 receptor systems. So that's the mechanism claim. This note just says one molecule, not 3 separate drugs, and that's important for you just for the reason I said before. And the balance sliders show you why receptor counting is maybe a bit too simple. A drug could hit the same receptor family, but still behave differently depending on the potency, the dose, the tissue exposure, as well as maybe how the signal is balanced. So for you, the takeaway could be this, is that more targets does not automatically mean better medicine. And the tested balance is what matters here. Okay, and the dose staircase, this is important to know because in Lilly's phase 3 program, participants started at 2 milligrams once weekly and increased every 4 weeks until their target dose, such as 9 or 12 milligrams. And that matters because many side effects happen during escalation of these doses. So a big effect at a high dose only matters clinically if people can actually get there and stay there. And as we go through it today, you don't need to memorize every pathway, but it could be helpful to understand what each signal is supposed to contribute. So GLP-1, it might help explain some appetite, stomach emptying, and glucose effects. GIP, it can add another incretin and metabolic layer. And then glucagon is the signal that could make liver fat and energy balance questions especially interesting. Okay, we start with GLP-1 because this is the familiar part here, as you see with Ozempic or Wegovy. So GLP-1 receptor activation, it can increase satiety, slow gastric emptying, and support insulin release when glucose is elevated. That is why GLP-1 drugs can affect both weight and blood sugar. Retatrutide includes this foundation, so part of its effect may feel familiar to people who know these Ozempic-style drugs. But the appetite dial, it turns down. So this is where people often describe less food noise. So for you, the useful interpretation is that GLP-1 signaling can change appetite pressure. So it's not simply willpower. So someone may still make choices, but the internal pull towards food can be lower. So that's why this drug class can feel so different from ordinary dieting. And the stomach clock, it adds the trade-off. So slower gastric emptying can make you feel full for sooner and longer, but it can also contribute to nausea, bloating. You might get a little bit of reflux or vomiting. So when people talk about GI side effects, they're not random. They are connected to the same gut-brain pathway that helps the drug work. And the pancreas icon adds the glucose control piece. So GLP-1, it supports insulin release when glucose is high, but that glucose-dependent part matters because it is more targeted than simply forcing insulin release all the time. And this helps explain why drugs in this family are used in diabetes and why A1C, you might hear hemoglobin A1C or HbA1c, this is a key outcome in Retatrutide diabetes trials. And just a quick aside, hemoglobin A1c is a marker. Sugar can bind to hemoglobin A1c, and it can provide kind of a running tally of the sugar in your bloodstream. And so it's helpful when tracking diabetes. And the glucose curve flattening here, it connects a little bit of the biology. So less food intake helps, and slower stomach emptying can also help. And then the glucose-dependent insulin release helps, but weight loss itself can also improve insulin resistance over time. So if you only kind of think of these drugs as appetite drugs, you might miss some of the broader metabolic picture, as with weight loss, with all of this combination, it can be quite beneficial metabolically in theory here. The nausea and vomiting icons are where the GLP-1 story becomes a bit more practical. So in the published phase 2 retatrutide obesity trial, gastrointestinal adverse effects were the most common, and they were also dose related, and they were mostly mild to moderate. So lower starting doses did help tolerability, and that's why slow escalation is not like a trial detail. It does affect whether people can stay on the therapy or not. And this little summary card just is here to tell you that it has an effect on all three of these things. Okay, now let's move to GIP. GIP is another incretin hormone released after meals. It can support insulin biology and appears connected to adipose tissue and broader metabolism. Tirzepatide made this pathway clinically important because combining GIP and GLP-1 produced large weight and hemoglobin A1C effects, and retatrutide builds on that idea. The nutrient arrow shows where GIP normally fits. So if you think of it, when carbs, fats, and protein arrive in the gut, GIP is part of the body's response to incoming nutrients. A weekly drug is not copying a short natural meal pulse exactly. It's more like turning that receptor biology into a sustained pharmacologic signaling. And the pancreas label explains why GIP matters in diabetes. And so similar to GLP-1, GIP can support insulin release when glucose is elevated. So that's why retatrutide is being studied not just for weight loss, but also for A1C reduction in type 2 diabetes. So the drug is trying to affect weight and glucose biology together. The adipose and metabolic icon is where maybe we can just resist oversimplifying it too much, because GIP is not just a button for the pancreas. It does also interact with fat tissue and energy handling in ways that depend on metabolic state and the presence of GLP-1 signaling. So the clinical effect is easier to see than the complete mechanism here. So we could maybe think of GIP overall as kind of an amplifier to the GLP-1 pathway there. So with tirzepatide, which is GLP-1 plus GIP, the dual kind of incretin agonism, and when I say incretin here, all I mean is hormones like GLP-1 and GIP, or these peptide compounds, I should be more specific. And they produce these combinatory clinical effects. And retatrutide, it still starts from the same broad idea, but then it also asks whether adding glucagon receptor activity can also produce an even broader metabolic effect. So that's why fair comparison requires trials and not just like these receptor diagrams. And the uncertainty circle is there for a reason, because if someone explains GIP as kind of one simple switch, they're probably not explaining it exactly here, because maybe it's a bit too simplified. And these pathways, they overlap across a lot of different tissues. And again, their effects should change with dose. So you should just leave the slide knowing the cartoon is helpful, but not totally complete. And there is this cautious version. So incretin plus metabolic layer, it kind of helps explain why the field moved beyond GLP-1 drugs, because it does not automatically explain every retatrutide result. So the real answer, it comes from endpoints like weight, A1C, liver fat, tolerability, and also like things like long-term outcomes. Okay. Let's talk about glucagon. And this is where retatrutide becomes different from the GLP-1s or GIP, GLP-1 plus GIP dual agonists. So this is different from semaglutide. This is different from tirzepatide. Now retatrutide adds on glucagon. So you may know glucagon as the hormone that tells the liver to release glucose. And that kind of makes it sound odd as a metabolic drug. And the reason researchers care is that glucagon biology also connects to energy use, fat metabolism, as well as liver fat. And the liver glucose output arrow shows the concern. So glucagon receptor activation can increase hepatic, which hepatic just means liver, glucose output. So this is not a simple kind of more receptors is better story. The clinical question is whether GLP-1 and GIP can balance glucose while glucagon contributes useful effects on energy balance and liver fat. So I'll continue to explain this one as we go here, but this is kind of the counterintuitive part of retatrutide. And the energy in flame and fat droplet shows the rationale here. So glucagon-containing agonists are being studied because glucagon signaling may influence things like substrate mobilization, energy expenditure, as well as this liver fat biology. But the careful phrase is not like fat burning switch. The careful phrase is there's a plausible pathway that needs weight, MRI, lipid, glucose, and safety data. So now the pathways, they land on this health dashboard here. So this is what matters for you. So body weight, A1C, liver fat, food noise, fat mass versus lean mass, all these different things can help, but a receptor diagram is only valuable if it predicts changes in outcomes that people can actually measure or feel. So this is really what we're trying to look at, is what does it actually affect in your day-to-day life. So the food noise tile is important because it is a real patient concern. Appetite and satiety fit the GLP-1 mechanism, but food noise itself is not the same as a primary retatrutide endpoint in the trials we're discussing. It's meaningful, but not proven in the same way as body weight or A1C. And the reward bubble adds alcohol and mood questions. So you may hear stories about reduced alcohol cravings or emotional changes on incretin drugs. Those stories may be worth studying, but for retatrutide, they should not be presented as established benefits unless they're directly measured. And this is the difference between curiosity and evidence here. Now, the liver fat tile gives you a strong measured result. In the MASLD substudy, so MASLD is metabolic associated steatotic liver disease. So some people, it's also called fatty liver disease. The liver over your lifetime can get a whole bunch of fat on it, and it can cause, simply put, a whole bunch of problems. And so when we had MRI PDFF data, and it showed that there was relative liver fat reductions at 24 weeks of about 43%, and this was at the 1 milligram dose, 57% at 4 milligrams, and 81% at 8 milligrams, and 82% at 12 milligrams, versus essentially no improvement with placebo. So that's measured evidence, and this is not just speculation with this liver fat result. And the body composition tile reminds you what the public evidence does not fully answer. Large weight loss often includes some lean mass, so clinicians also care about things like protein intake, resistance training, and some of these other mechanisms as well. And again, A1C, again, very important. Some of the clinical trials have looked at knee osteoarthritis as well. So this, again, is important here. And in the knee osteoarthritis specifically, I'll mention it later, but there is the WOMAC, pain and function scores, and they kind of help you see whether weight loss translated into less pain or better improvement. And so that's why retatrutide is being studied across obesity-related complications and not just the scale. Okay, so this evidence filter is the tool I want you to kind of keep in mind. The mechanism can explain what could happen. The trial endpoints tell you what was measured. These anecdotes, might be helpful in what somebody noticed. And then the unknowns is where we don't want to fill in any gaps based off speculation here. Okay, now for the good stuff here. So let's get on to the published phase 2 evidence. So this is the first hard data set you should know with retatrutide. It was a trial by Lilly, and it included 338 adults with obesity or overweight with at least one weight-related condition, and they did not have type 2 diabetes. It was a multi-center, so a bunch of different locations. It was randomized, a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, and it ran for 48 weeks of treatment. And these dose arms explain why the headline number needs context. So participants received placebo or retatrutide target doses of 1 milligrams, 4 milligrams, 8 milligrams, or 12 milligrams once weekly. For 4 milligrams or higher, dose escalation happened every 4 weeks for up to 12 weeks. And dose affected both how much weight people lost and how tolerable the drug was. At 24 weeks, the higher doses had already separated from placebo. Mean body weight change was about negative 7.2% at 1 milligram, about minus 12.9% in the combined 4 milligram groups, about minus 17.3% in the combined 8 milligram groups, and minus 17.5% at 12 milligrams, versus around minus 1.6% or 2-ish% with that placebo. At 48 weeks, the 12 milligram group reached minus 24.2% mean weight loss versus 2.6-ish, 2.1 to 2.6% with placebo. The combined 8 milligram groups reached minus 22.8%, and the combined 4 milligram groups reached minus 17.1%. At 12 milligrams, 93% of folks lost at least 10% of body weight, and 83% of those lost at least 15%. And the no plateau arrow, it does need some careful wording. So the phase 2 curves were still moving downward at week 48. So the researchers had reason to test longer treatment, but you should not extend the line forever in your head. So it means the study ended before the long-term plateau was fully defined, but not that weight loss has no limit with retatrutide. The GI icons add the main tolerability finding. So in phase 2, adverse events were reported in 73 to 94% of retatrutide groups, compared with 70% on placebo. And the most common effects or adverse events were gastrointestinal. They were mostly mild to moderate, but they were also dose related. And again, going back to earlier in the video, that's why that dose staircase matters. So not starting out right at the top dose. The heart rate icon is a specific safety signal, and it's not a vague worry. In the New England Journal of Medicine phase 2 trial, heart rate increases were dose dependent. They peaked at 24 weeks and declined afterward. The paper notes they were similar to heart rate increases reported with GLP-1 receptor agonists. So the right takeaway is kind of monitoring and not just assuming that everyone is going to be totally fine, because there might be some adverse effects. Okay, now we move to the phase 3 top line results here. These are important because they are larger and closer to regulatory decision making, but they're still sponsor-reported summaries until full peer-reviewed papers appear. So TRIUMPH-4, it studied obesity or overweight with knee osteoarthritis, and they did not have diabetes. TRANSCEND, type 2 diabetes-1, studied type 2 diabetes. TRIUMPH-4 should have some population context here. It randomized 445 participants to retatrutide 9 milligrams, retatrutide 12 milligrams, or placebo for 68 weeks. Participants had obesity or overweight and knee osteoarthritis, and 84% had baseline BMI of at least 35. So this was a high-need clinical population, not kind of a general cosmetic weight loss sample. And the TRIUMPH-4 weight result is large. Using the efficacy estimand, Lilly reported minus 26.4% body weight at 9 milligrams and minus 28.7% at 12 milligrams, compared with minus 2.1% with placebo. So from an average baseline weight of 248.5 pounds, that was about 64.2 pounds and 71.2 pounds lost. The WOMAC sliders added the knee outcome. Lilly reported WOMAC pain score reductions of about 4.5 points at 9 milligrams and 4.4 points at 12 milligrams from a baseline around 6, compared with 2.4 points on placebo. So this suggests that pain and function improved, but you should remember that these are top-line results and some percent change interpretations were post hoc. And when I say post hoc, I just mean after the fact. And TRANSCEND type 2 diabetes-1 asks a different question. And that question is what happens in type 2 diabetes. So it enrolled 537 adults whose diabetes were inadequately controlled with diet and exercise alone. So baseline A1C was 7.9%, and average baseline weight was 213.6 pounds, and BMI was 35.8. And diabetes trials, they often show different weight loss patterns than non-diabetes obesity trials. And so just to clarify here, when I say inadequately controlled with diet and exercise alone, I mean that A1C number is typically above 7. So in medicine, trying to keep that baseline hemoglobin A1C number under the 7% mark for the majority of kind of functionally independent middle-aged adults is kind of a target there. So if it's well above that, getting into like close to 8% or above, then you think, okay, how can we bring this number down? So when that's what uncontrolled diabetes means there. And the diabetes results combine A1C and weight. So at 40 weeks, using the efficacy estimand again, Lilly reported A1C reductions of 1.7, 2.0, and 1.9 percentage points at 4, 9, and 12 milligrams versus 0.8 with placebo. Weight loss was 11.5, 15.5, and 16.8% reductions versus 2.5% with placebo. And that's why this result matters. So an A1C reduction of around 2%, that's pretty large. But this little stamp here is just a reminder about how to read the top line. So it's important to understand this is sponsor published. So there will be a peer-reviewed publication that will be out hopefully relatively soon in the next few months. As well as the regulatory gate is kind of the status answer here. So positive phase 3 top lines from these trials, they're not approval. So regulators still review the efficacy, the safety, the manufacturing, and a whole bunch of other things. And so Lilly's public FAQ, they say retatrutide is not currently FDA approved and it remains investigational. So you should not treat kind of this trial success as public availability yet. Now the comparison board comes back. So mechanistically, semaglutide, tirzepatide, and retatrutide differ in receptor design, as we've seen before. But practically, semaglutide and tirzepatide have approved products and labels, while retatrutide does not. And the gray market vial sits outside regulated medicine, so it should be discussed as a risk and not a treatment choice. And the crossed out ladder is there because a simple ranking here could be misleading. So whether it's 1 receptor, 2 receptors, 3 receptors, it does kind of sound intuitive, but the clinical performance depends on a whole array of things. And to say that one of these drugs is better than another because it has more receptors is not exactly true until you see the exact data and the safety data. So retatrutide's numbers, they are impressive in its trials, but again, they're not like a head-to-head win over every approved drug in every patient. So right now it would be important to see a clinical trial that compares in the kind of same study all 3 of these different drugs. And I believe there is one ongoing right now, but I don't think we have the data from that just yet. And these variable cards, they can kind of help with reading comparisons. So population, is it diabetes or no diabetes? Is there BMI? What's their BMI? What are the comorbidities? How's the dosing? So when I talk about all these different dosing stuff, is it 4 milligrams? Is it 9 milligrams? Is it 12? They're all different, as well as the duration. So just keep this in mind that these details can change the headline, even though the details might not be discussed. And again, as I mentioned, this cross-trial comparison is not head-to-head. So it'd be important to have one trial that is a head-to-head. And yeah, so let's move on here. So the large effects with retatrutide, the pros card here, it should be kind of evidence-based. So the strongest positives with retatrutide are the large weight reductions in phase 2 and phase 3 top lines, the large MRI measured liver fat reductions in that MASLD substudy, that's the metabolic associated steatotic liver disease, the A1C reductions in TRANSCEND-T2D diabetes-1, and a plausible 3 receptor mechanism. So those are reasons to kind of follow along with the news with this drug and just look at what the research is saying as it comes out. But some of the cons should be specific too. So we should watch the long-term safety, GI effects, heart rate changes, the tingling I had mentioned before, the discontinuation rates, so people dropping off from the trials, body composition, regulatory status, and then unofficial access. Again, as I mentioned, it's this kind of separate risk. So the most useful takeaway here is not that it's good or bad. It's just that evidence does still here need to mature. So this safety scale might be a helpful way to think about any of these powerful obesity medicines. For many people, large weight loss can reduce risk and improve function for many different conditions, but the benefit has to be weighed against side effects. So with retatrutide, you have this, you can think of it as this little scale where on one side you have the kind of GLP-1 and GIP side. And this is reducing our intake of food, given the many effects on metabolism, our stomach, as well as our brain. And so that's reducing intake. That's one side of the weight loss. Then if we kind of think about looking to the other side of the scale, you have this push up from the retatrutide glucagon receptor. Because when you activate that receptor, thermogenesis can increase in the liver, and it would burn off that liver fat and raise your metabolic rate, raising your heart rate as well, and many other things kind of pushing up the burn side. So there's both decreased intake and increased expenditure with retatrutide that is uniquely powerful, but still we should look at what the evidence and access says as they continue to come out. The GI icons, they get concrete TRIUMPH-4 numbers. So Lilly reported nausea in 38.1% of individuals at 9 milligrams and 43.2% at 12 milligrams versus around 10.7% with placebo. Diarrhea was 34.7 and 33.1%, so around 1/3 of individuals versus 13.4% in the placebo. And vomiting was about 20% in both retatrutide arms versus 0% with placebo. So that is kind of a real tolerability context. So about 1 in 5 people were vomiting, as well as about 1 in 3 were having diarrhea. So there are some concerns here. And with the tingling that I'd mentioned earlier, it was reported at around 8.8% at 9 milligrams and 20.9% at 12 milligrams, compared with 0.7% in placebo. So Lilly described these events as generally mild and rarely leading to discontinuation. But again, this is another safety signal here that should be recognized. And the body composition warning is not like anti-drug. It is kind of common clinical sense here. And the idea is that if weight loss is very large, preserving strength, protein intake, lean mass, and function, it becomes part of safe use. So for someone who's older, frail, or maybe starting at a lower BMI, excessive loss could matter. So the scale is important, but it's not the only outcome here. And the reward and emotion bubble stays in the lower evidence category. Food noise, alcohol, mood, libido, they all matter to patients, and they matter for us as people interested in this molecule, but they should be measured before being promoted as benefits. So if you hear confident claims, you might ask, okay, was this a trial endpoint? Was this a questionnaire result? Or was this just like a personal story from a friend? So the access split is the blunt practical ending here. So Lilly says retatrutide has not yet been reviewed or approved by any regulatory agency. It's only legally available through Lilly clinical trials. And anything claiming to be retatrutide outside that pathway, it raises questions about authenticity, concentration, sterility, storage, as well as medical supervision. And this final board here, it gives you the framework to reuse. So mechanism explains why retatrutide might work. Measured evidence tells you what changed in trials. Anecdotes identify questions that may deserve research. Status tells you whether the drug is approved and legitimately available. And this framework has helped me and with kind of both dismissal as well as overconfidence. So I found it kind of helps me have a balanced approach to looking at any of these novel drug mechanisms. So with the mechanism, you have that triple agonism with the clinical trials and the measured evidence. The GLP-1 plus GIP plus glucagon receptor activation had a 24.2% mean weight loss at 40 weeks. In the phase 2 trial at 12 milligrams, there were large MRI measured liver fat reductions. There was a 28.7% weight loss in the TRIUMPH-4 topline and A1C reductions, so for diabetes, up to 2 percentage points in the TRANSCEND Type 2 Diabetes-1 trial. And so the final answer should be disciplined. Retatrutide is one of the most evidence-rich investigational obesity drugs to watch, but with unusually large weight loss and liver fat signals, but it's still investigational. It's not FDA approved and not legitimately available outside clinical trials. If you remember one line, make it this: there is a strong signal, there's real trade-offs, but it's an incomplete long-term picture. So thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and leave a comment and like, and yeah, hope you have a great rest of your day. Let me know if you want any other videos, and yeah, thanks so much. Bye-bye now.